Hello, everybody. Today we'll be reading the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, Chapter 1 Introduction. The Power of Thought. The man who thought his way into partnership with Thomas A. Edison. Truly, thoughts are things, and powerful things at that, when they are mixed with definiteness of purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for their translation into riches or other material objects. A little more than 30 years ago, Edwin C. Barnes discovered how true it is that men really do think and grow rich. He discovered his discovery did not come about one sitting, it came little by little, beginning with a burning desire to become a business associate of the great Edison. One of the chief characteristics of Barnes' desire was that it was definite. He wanted to work with Edison, not for him. Observe carefully the description of how he went about translating his desire into reality, and you will have a better understanding of the 13 principles which lead to riches. When this desire or impulse of thought first flashed into his mind, he was in no position to act upon it. Two difficulties stood in his way. He did not know Mr. Edison, and he did not have enough money to pay his railroad fare to Orange, New Jersey. These difficulties were sufficient to have discouraged the majority of men from making an attempt to carry out the desire. But this was no ordinary desire. He was so determined to find a way to carry out his desire that he finally decided to travel by blind baggage rather than to be defeated. He presented himself at Mr. Edison's laboratory and announced he had come to go into business with the inventor. In speaking of the first meeting between Barnes and Edison years later, Mr. Edison said, "He stood there before me looking like an ordinary tramp, but there was something in expression of his face which conveyed the impression that he was determined to get what he had come after." I had learned from years of experience with men that when a man really desires a thing so deeply that he is willing to stake his entire future on a single turn of the wheel in order to get it, he is sure to win. I gave him the opportunity he asked for because I saw he had made up his mind to stand by until he succeeded. Subsequent events proved that no mistake was made. Just what young Barnes said to Mr. Edison on that occasion was far less important than that which he thought. Edison himself said so. It could not have been young man's appearance which got him his start in Edison office, for that was definitely against him. It was what he thought that counted. If the significance of the statement could be conveyed to every person who reads it, there could be no need for the reminder of this book. Barnes did not get his partnership with Edison on his first interview. He did get a chance to work with Edison officers at a normal wage, doing work that was unimportant to Edison but most important to Barnes because it gave him an opportunity to display his merchandise where he intended partner could see it. Months went by. Apparently nothing happened to bring the goal which Barnes had set up in his mind as his definite major purpose. But something important was happening in Barnes' mind. He was constantly intensifying his desire to become the business associate of Edison. Psychologists had correctly said that when one is truly ready for a thing, it puts it in its appearance. Barnes was ready for the business association with Edison. Moreover, he was determined to remain ready until he got that which he was seeking. He did not say to himself, "Ah, well, what's the use? I'll change my mind and try for a salesman job." But he did say, I came here to go into business with Edison, and I will accomplish this if it takes remainder of my life. He meant it. What a different story men would have to tell if only they would adopt a definite purpose and stand by that purpose until it had time to become an all-consuming obsession. Maybe young Barnes did not know it at that time, but his bulldog determination, his persistence in standing back of a single desire was destined to move down all opposition and bring him the opportunity he was seeking. When the opportunity came, it appeared in a different form and from a different direction that Barnes had expected. That is one of the tricks of opportunity. It has a sly habit of slipping in by backdoor, and often it comes disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat. Perhaps this is why so many fail to recognize the opportunity. Mr. Edison had just perfected a new office device known at that time as the Edison dictating machine. His salesmen were not enthusiastic over the machine. They did not believe it could be sold without great effort. Barnes saw his opportunity. It had crawled in quietly hidden in a queer looking machine which interested no one but Barnes and the inventor. Barnes knew he could sell the Edison dictating machine. He suggested this to Edison and promptly got his chance. He did sell the machine. In fact, he sold it so successfully that Edison gave him a contract to distribute and market it all over the nation. Out of that business association grew the slogan made by Edison and installed by Barnes. The business alliance had been in operation for more than 30 years. Out of it, Barnes had made himself rich in money, but he has done something infinitely greater. He was proven that one really may think and grow rich. How much actual cash that original desire of Barnes has been worth to him, I have no way of thinking. Perhaps it has brought him $2 or $3 million, but the amount, whatever it is, becomes insignificant when compared with the greater asset he acquired in the form of definite knowledge that an intangible impulse of thought can be transmuted into its physical counterpart by application of known principles. Barnes literally thought himself into a partnership with the great Edison. He thought himself into a fortune. He had nothing to start with except the capacity to know what he wanted and the determination to stand by that desire until he realized it. He had no money to begin with. He had but little education. He had no influence, but he did have initiative, faith, and the will to win. With these intangible forces, he made himself the number one man with the greatest inventor who ever lived. Now let us look at a different situation and study a man who had plenty of tangible evidence of riches but lost it because he stopped 3 feet short of the goal he was seeking. 3 feet from gold. One of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. Every person is guilty of the mistake at one time or another. An uncle of Darby was caught by the gold fever in the gold rush days and went west to dig and grow rich. He had never heard that more gold has been mined from the brains of men than has ever been taken from the earth. He stacked a claim and went to work with pick and shawl. The going was hard, but his lust for gold was definite. After weeks of labor, he was rewarded by the discovery of shining ore. He needed machinery to bring the ore to the surface. Quietly, he covered up the mine, retraced his footsteps to his home in Maryland, told his relatives and a few neighbors of the strike. They got together money for the needed machinery, had it shipped. The uncle and Davy went back to work the mine. The first car of ore was mined and shipped to the smelter. The returns proved they had one of the richest mines in Colorado. A few more cars of that ore would clear the debts. Then would come the big killing in profits. Down went drills, up went hopes of Darby and uncle. Then something happened. The vein of gold disappeared. They had come to the end of the rainbow. The pot of the gold was no longer there. They drilled on desperately, trying to pick up the vein again, all to no avail. Finally, they decided to quit. They sold the machinery to a junk man for a few $100s and took the train back home. Some junk men are dumb, but not this one. He called in a mining engineer to look at the mine and do a little calculating. The engineer advised the project had failed because the owners did not familiar with fault lines. His calculation showed that the vein would just be found 3 feet from where the Darbys had stopped drilling. This is exactly where it was found. The junk man took millions of dollars in ore from the mine because he knew enough to seek expert counsel before giving up. Most of the money which went into machinery was procured through the efforts of Darby, who was then a very young man. The money came from his relatives and neighbors Because of their faith in him, he paid back every dollar of it, although he was years in doing so. Long after Darby recouped his loss many times over when he made the discovery that desire can be transmuted into gold. The discovery came after he went into the business of selling life insurance. Remembering that he lost a huge fortune because he stopped 3 feet from gold, Darby profited by the enterprise in his chosen work by the simple method of saying to himself, I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I will never stop because men say no when I ask them to buy insurance. Darby is one of a small group of fewer than 50 men who sell more than $1 million in life insurance annually. He owes his stickability to the lesson he learned from his quietability in the gold mining business. Before success comes in a man's life, he is sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. When defeat overtakes a man, the easiest and the most logical thing to do is to quit. That is exactly what majority of men do. More than 500 of the most successful men this country has ever known told the author the greatest success came just one step beyond the point at which defeat had overtaken them. Failure is a trickster with a keen sense of irony and cunning. He takes great delight in tripping one when success is almost within reach. A 50-cent lesson in persistence. Short after Mr. Darby received his degree from the University of Hard Knocks and had decided to profit by his experience in gold mining business, he had the good fortune to be present on an occasion that proved to him that no does not necessarily mean no. One afternoon he was helping his uncle grind wheat in an old fashioned mill. The uncle operated a large farm on which a number of colored sharecrop farmers lived. Quietly the door was opened and a small colored girl, the daughter of a tenant, walked in and took her place near the door. The uncle looked up, saw the child, and barked at her roughly. What do you want? Meekly the child replied, My mama say send her 50 cents. I'll not do it, the uncle retorted. No, you run on home. Yes, Shah, the child replied. But she did not move. The uncle went ahead with his work so busily engaged that he did not pay enough attention to the child to observe that she did not leave. When he looked up and saw her still standing there, he yelled at her, I told you go home now, go or I'll take a switch to you. The little girl said, Yes, Shah. But she did not budge an inch. The uncle dropped a sack of grain he was about to pour into the mill hopper, picked up a barrel saw and started towards the girl child with an impression on his face that indicated trouble. Darby held his breath. He was certain he was about to witness a murder. He knew his uncle had a fierce temper. He knew that the colored child were not supposed to defy white people in that part of the country. When the uncle reached the spot where the child was standing, she quickly stepped forward one step, looked up into his eyes, and screamed at the top of her voice, My mama's got to have that 50 cents. The uncle stopped, looked at her for a minute, then slowly laid the barrel straw of the floor, but put his hand in his pocket, took out half $1 and gave it to her. The child took the money and slowly backed toward the door, never taking her eyes off the man whom she had just conquered. After she had gone, Uncle sat down on a box and looked out the window into the space for more than 10 minutes. He was pondering with awe over the weeping he had just taken. Mr. Darby, too, was doing some thinking. That was the first time in all his experience that he had seen a colored child deliberately master an adult white person. How did she do it? What happened to his uncle that caused him to lose his fierceness and become as docile as a lamb? What strange power did the child use that made her master over her superior? Those and the other similar questions flashed into Darby's mind, but he did not find the answer until years later when he told me the story. Strangely, the story of his unusual experience was told to the author in the old mill on the very spot where the uncle took his whipping. Strangely, too, I had devoted nearly a quarter of the century to study the power which enabled an ignorant, illiterate, colored child to conquer an intelligent man. As we stood there in the musty old mill, Mr. Darby repeated the story of the unusual conquest and finished by asking, "What can you make of it? The strange power did that cause that child use that so completely whipped my uncle?" The answer to his question will be found in the principles described in this book. The answer is full and complete. It contains details and instructions sufficient to enable anyone to understand and apply the same force which the little child accidentally stumbled upon. Keep your mind alert and you will observe exactly what strange power came to rescue of the child. You will catch a glimpse of this power in the next chapter. Somewhere in the book you will find an idea that will quicken your receptive powers and place at your command. For your own benefit, the same irresistible power, the awareness of this power may come to you in first chapter or it may flash to your mind in subsequent chapters. It may come in the form of a single idea or it may come in the nature of a plan or a purpose. Again, it may cause you to go back into your past experiences of failure or defeat and bring to the surface some lesson by which you can regain all that you lost through defeat. After I had described to Mr. Darby the power unwitting used by the little colored child, he quickly retraced his 30 years of experience as a life insurance salesman and frankly acknowledged that his success in that field was due in no small degree to the lesson he had learned from the child. Mr. Darby pointed out every time a prospect tried to bow me out without buying, I saw the child standing there in the old mill, her big eyes glaring in defiance, and I said to myself, I have got to make this sale. The better portion of all sales I have made were after people said no. He recalled too his mistake in having stopped only 3 feet from gold, but he said that experience was a blessing in disguise. It taught me to keeping on, no matter how hard the going may be, a lesson I needed to learn before I could succeed in anything. The story of Mr. Darby and his uncle, the colored child, and the gold mine doubtless will be read by hundreds of men who make their living by selling life insurance, and to all of these the author wishes to offer the suggestion that Darby owes to these two experiences his ability to sell more than $1 million of life insurance every year. Life is strange and often imponderable. Both success and failures have their roots in simple experiences. Mr. Darby's experience were commonplace and simple enough, yet they had the answer to his destiny in life. Therefore, they were as important as life itself. He profited by these two dramatic experiences because he analyzed them and found the lesson they taught. But what of the man who has neither the time nor the inclination to study failure in such a knowledge that may lead to success? Where and how is he to learn the art of converting defeat into stepping stones of opportunity? In the answer to this question, this book was written. The answer called